The annual ceremony in Stockholm, at which the Nobel Prizes are awarded, is a major media event. Each prize is worth over €1 million. But very few people know that the prizes stem from the donation of someone who made history as the inventor of dynamite and as one of the 19th century's most successful entrepreneurs. So, who was this man who revolutionized weapons technology with his inventions, yet detested war all his life? Alfred Nobel was born in Stockholm on October the 21st, 1833. At the time, the family was in serious financial difficulties, and that same year, Alfred's father was forced to declare himself bankrupt. He'd made a name for himself designing naval mines. After becoming insolvent, he went to Finland and then Russia to start a new career. The family finally joined him in St. Petersburg in 1842. Alfred was taught by a private tutor. He showed an interest in the natural sciences, but literature too held a particular appeal for him. To turn the young man's mind to other things, in 1850 his father sent Alfred on a study trip to England, America and France. In Paris, Alfred worked as assistant to the chemist Théophile Jules Pelouse. A few years previously he'd also taught Asciano Sobrero. In 1847, Sobrero had invented nitroglycerin by mixing glycerol with saltpeter and sulfuric acid. But Sobrero never managed to explode the new substance under controlled conditions. When an accidental explosion left him permanently disfigured, Sobrero abandoned his attempts to find a technical application for nitroglycerin. The main explosive in use at this time was black gunpowder. Developed in China some 1,000 years ago, it's the oldest known explosive. Black gunpowder became known in Europe in the early 14th century and soon found use in the military sector. It was not until the late 17th century that black gunpowder was also used in mining and road construction. But what exactly is an explosion? It's a rapid chemical reaction in which pressure and heat are released until the whole explosive has gasified. This extremely swift increase in volume creates a pressure wave which spreads in all directions. When Alfred Nobel returned to St. Petersburg in 1853, he immediately embarked on research into the new substance discovered by Sobrero. It fascinated him. Not only did nitroglycerin have 6 or 7 times the explosive effect of black gunpowder, glycerol was also a very cheap raw material, a byproduct from making soap. But at first, Nobel too could not control the new substance. Through the Crimean War, the Nobel's factory was flourishing. Amongst other things, it manufactured naval mines which prevented the British fleet from shelling St. Petersburg. But when the war was lost, the Russian government lacked the funds to invest in further arms production. So in 1863, the Nobel's firm went bankrupt once more, and the family returned to Stockholm. Alfred now began to make an intensive study of nitroglycerin in order to finally turn it into a manageable explosive. One of the main obstacles to the industrial production of nitroglycerin was its sensitivity to heat and vibrations. Even the slightest jolt caused the oily liquid to explode, ruling out any civil or military application. But Nobel had an idea. With the help of a detonator, perhaps, nitroglycerin could be made to explode safely under controlled conditions. On July the 15th, 1864, he applied for a patent for his initial igniter, as he called it. It was perhaps his most important invention. Through the ignition of a small amount of mercury fulminate in a blasting cap, a large quantity of explosive could at last be detonated under controlled conditions. Nobel, it seemed, had tamed nitroglycerin. Now production could get underway in earnest. The company began to make a profit. But then, the Nobel's laboratory in Stockholm exploded, killing 5 people, among them Alfred's younger brother, Emil. The city of Stockholm's immediate reaction was to ban all experiments within the municipal area. Despite this setback, Nobel continued his research. The explosive simply had to be made safe for industrial application. Nobel tried to bind nitroglycerin with different substances, such as gypsum and wood shavings, in order to make it insensitive to jolts and vibrations. But at first, he couldn't find any solution to the problem. To reduce the risk of transporting nitroglycerin, he set up his own production centres in a number of countries and had the manufacture of Nobel blasting oil, as it was called, patented in each of them. In 1865, Nobel opened a new factory in Krummel near Hamburg, but only a year later, part of it was destroyed in a violent explosion. He had the premises rebuilt immediately and continued his research undeterred. But although the damage was soon repaired, the general public remained sceptical. Various accidents gave rise to discussions in many countries on whether or not to ban nitroglycerin. But Nobel was convinced that the accidents were only the result of the material being wrongly handled. Chance came to his aid. In Krummel, some blasting oil escaped but was soaked up by silica, a porous, absorbent, sandy material which the transport crate had been filled with to protect the explosive from jolts. Formed from the skeletons of primeval algae, silica was the substance Nobel had sought for so long. It made the volatile blasting oil insensitive to jarring. What's more, silica was very cheap, since there were large deposits of it near Krummel, which could be mined with ease. Nobel mixed 3 parts of blasting oil with 1 part of silica to create a paste. He thus obtained a new solid explosive that could be formed in whatever sized portions were required. Because of its enormous explosive force, he called it dynamite, from dynamis, the Greek word for power. This was the explosive the world had been waiting for. One big advantage of Nobel's dynamite was that it could be manufactured in stick form. New drilling techniques meant that the explosive could now be detonated inside the rock itself, and because of the enormous explosive force involved, it was possible to literally move mountains. At long last, major projects like the Gotthard Tunnel, the Corinth Canal and the Panama Canal could be embarked on. The 81-kilometre-long canal through the Isthmus of Panama finally linked the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, more than halving the sea route from New York to San Francisco. The triumphal advance of Nobel's dynamite could no longer be stopped. Production in Krummel doubled from year to year, and Nobel founded new factories in Germany, England and the United States. When his various firms began to compete with one another more and more, forcing prices down, Nobel united all his enterprises in one company. In 1873 he left Germany. Nobel's health had been poor ever since adolescence, and it was for health reasons that he moved to Paris. Near Paris, he had another explosives factory built. He also purchased a military training ground for carrying out research into improving his dynamite. That was because the explosive still had several drawbacks. For instance, if it came into contact with water, the nitroglycerin dissolved out, rendering the explosives useless. In 1887, Nobel solved the problem, entirely by chance. After cutting his finger on a piece of glass, He stopped the bleeding by applying collodion, a viscous solution of cellulose nitrate. This made him think about absorbing nitroglycerin with nitrocellulose, and that is how Nobel came to develop blasting gelatin. One advantage of blasting gelatin is that the higher proportion of nitroglycerin it contains gives it greater explosive force. And since it's not soluble in water, it can also be detonated underwater. In Sweden, blasting gelatin was marketed under the name Extra Dynamite. And it is these gelatinized nitroglycerin products which we today call dynamite. Nobel's fame as a researcher and entrepreneur grew worldwide. To protect his discoveries with patents, he travelled far and wide with samples of explosives in his hand luggage. The only disturbing feature of the wonder explosive was the huge cloud of smoke that accompanied every detonation. On the battlefield, for instance, it meant that vision was obscured for a long time. So, by altering his blasting gelatin, Nobel developed ballistite, a smokeless powder used solely by the military. Ballistite also has the slow combustion properties needed to give a bullet effective propulsion without creating excessive pressures in the barrel. Nobel's ballistite made the development of the machine gun possible. But Nobel never publicly associated himself with the military use of his products. In fact, he secretly detested war. He was not only the seemingly unprincipled arms manufacturer who made handsome profits from the deaths of tens of thousands of soldiers. Thus, he corresponded with the celebrated pacifist Bertha von Suttner, authoress of the anti-war book Lay Down Your Arms. He discussed peace policy with her and the idea of an alliance of states, similar to the concept behind the United Nations. In 1891, Nobel got into political difficulties. Suspected in France of espionage, he moved to San Remo in Italy. It was in San Remo that Alfred Nobel passed away on December the 10th, 1896. At the time, nitroglycerin was already being used to treat angina pectoris, a heart condition, but he stubbornly refused to take it and died of a stroke. By the end of his life, Alfred Nobel had applied for 355 patents. 80 factories in some 20 countries were manufacturing his explosives. But he wanted posterity to remember him not as the king of dynamite, but as a patron of science, culture and peace. Consequently, in his will, he stipulated that his entire inheritance, 31 million Swedish crowns, should be placed in an endowment fund, with the interest used each year to honour outstanding achievements in the field of research. In addition, prizes were also to be given for achievement in the fields of literature and peacemaking, both of which were Nobel's secret passions. His relatives tried to contest the will, so it was not until 1901 that the first Nobel Prizes could be awarded. One of the first Nobel Peace Prizes went to Bertha von Suttner, the only woman who ever played an important role in Nobel's life.